Hello and welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast. Joining me as always, Miss Fantasy herself, Tara Roberts. How you doing, Tara?
I'm good. I'm hungry, but other than that, doing good.
So I was going to ask you all kinds of questions this week, and I was going to load them all up there, but I've already got what your answer is going to be because I already kind of went through the fantasy Twitter sphere there, so to speak, and I pretty much know how you're going to answer every question that involves some kind of conflict between the two of us. And I've got the clip right here.
Nope, I'm good. Nope.
I think that's how we're going to have to run the show here for the rest of the season. So we've got that going on. That clip there, if you're listening to us on the podcast form, Tara did something that I've been more than known to do over my time. And it's usually called putting your foot in your mouth and making a bad bet that comes back to bite you. I believe that was Tara was on Twitter saying, if Will Levis throws a fourth touchdown, I'm going to put mayo in my coffee like the legend himself. How was that for you, Tara? Tell us how mayo and coffee go. Was it creamy or was it chunky?
Horribly chunky. I said I'm hungry right now, but now I won't be hungry anymore. I don't know how my stomach is churning empty, but somehow just the thought of it managed to bring that up. Yeah, no, it's chunky. It's horribly chunky. The taste is not ideal, but imagine chunks of mayo going down your throat. If you can fathom that, it's not a pleasant experience. Not a pleasant experience.
Well, what wasn't a pleasant experience is some of the injuries that we had that took place here this week, including one of my favorite players in the entire National Football League, and that was Kirk Cousins. It's more than just an Achilles injury. It's the leg that it happened on the right foot. So if you're a quarterback, that's that foot you're planning, you're driving on. Like Aaron Rodgers, I believe, was his left foot. So that's why we're seeing him around the stadium throwing the ball around because that's not his leg that he's driving on. Kirk Cousins is different. So if we're expecting him back before week number 1, I think we may, again, not a doctor here, but this may be more troublesome for Kirk Cousins than it is for Aaron Rodgers to recover just because of which leg it's actually on. But that has a whole lot to do with a lot of these Vikings when it comes to fantasy, Tara. So when you look at Jordan Addison, Justin Jefferson, who's just about to return to the lineup, TJ Hawkinson, do we think that Jaron Hall or Joshua Dobbs can sustain any kind of value in these pass catchers for the Minnesota Vikings?
This week is a little sketchy, although I will say you're still rolling out TJ Hawkinson and Jordan Addison. But I will say that Minnesota did the right thing. Making the trade for Joshua Dobbs was a solid trade. It gives them a fighting chance. He is a competent-ish quarterback. He's not, not the best option, but if we were looking out there and saying, well, who's out there that we could, on the market that we can pull. And the top name coming up is Carson Wentz. Yeah, you should have, making the trade for Josh Dobbs was the right move there. I think that we'll see him be able to provide enough production for there to be multiple starters. They're not going to have the same massive upside as they had before. We'll kind of see like what we saw with Kyler Murray there in Arizona. Kyler Murray was very usable. He was a weekly start. He had a decent floor. His ceiling was capped, unfortunately, because, Joshua Dobbs is capped. But, he was getting 17-ish, 15 to 17-ish fantasy points on a regular basis there. And that'll do. That's a solid, giving you a high-end wide receiver 3, low-end wide receiver 2 production was where he was kind of averaging out for. So I think we'll still have usability there, particularly from Jefferson and Hawkinson and from a touchdown perspective, Addison. So it's a downgrade, but they'll still be usable in redraft.
And we saw with Joshua Dobbs, the astrophysicist, the rocket scientist, so to speak. He's a smart guy, and he was able to make things happen there in Arizona. Marquise Hollywood Brown still had some value. Wilson still had some value. Trey McBride, Zach Ertz, they both still had value. So there's value to be had here still in the Minnesota Vikings offense. Now, speaking of Joshua Dobbs, he's not the only quarterback moving in a degree. I mean, we had all kinds of upheaval at the quarterback position here heading into week 9. It's bad enough that we're already without Russell Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, Jared Goff, and Brock Purdy this week. We're already out those 4 quarterbacks with the Broncos, the Jags, the Lions, the 49ers all on a bye. And then we look at what some teams are doing, whether they have to do it or not, or if it's because of injury. We know Matthew Stafford has a UCL injury, which is very similar to Justin Fields' UCL injury about grip strength of the ball, which means we could see the backup quarterback there take over and ripping for the Los Angeles Rams this week. We have Tyson Bagent already in there. We got Tyler Heineke taking over Desmond Ridder. We've got Aiden O'Connell taking over Jimmy Garoppolo. We've got quarterbacks, PJ Walker possibly still playing this week ahead of Deshaun Watson, who returned to practice, but we know how that has typically played out the last few weeks. So when we look at this quarterback landscape, and you may be looking for a quarterback this week, we'll talk about our starts and sits in a little bit later, but there's some quarterbacks here that would typically be completely off your radar that have to be on your radar. So when we look at these quarterbacks, Tara, just turning in, they're not going to be automatically in our starts, but is there one quarterback that maybe intrigues you more than the rest, whether that's Taylor Heineke there or Rippin, Aiden O'Connell? Is there one guy you're maybe leaning towards a little bit more than the rest?
Oh man, are you limiting me to this new quarterback situation? Is it the, or can I dip into free agency? If we're limited to the new quarterback situation, I feel like we can't overlook Will Levis. That would be my top option easily. But if we're looking at these other guys here, I struggle to get on board with any of them really. Maybe we lean towards Heineke as the guy who at least gives us that rushing upside potential that we saw in Washington. So that could, pop up again. And he's obviously got fantastic talent there with Drake London and Kyle Pitts and Bijan Robinson, if he so chooses to use them against Arthur Smith's will. So if I had to dip in there, maybe Taylor Heineke would be the one that I would go with, but I would prefer to stay outside of that realm.
Well, I guess I could have included Clayton Tooney in there too. But part of me seems that the Cardinals moving on from Joshua Dobbs, maybe Clayton Tooney's the guy this week, but maybe, just maybe, there's a glimpse of hopes at the quarterback position that maybe this week could be the week that Kyler Murray returns. And if Kyler Murray returns, that's going to bring all kinds of fantasy goodness out to the desert. But do we think Murray plays this week, or is this kind of me just being wishful and hoping for something to take place here in fantasy?
You're being wishful and hoping. I too got a dynasty team where I've got Matt Stafford, and I would love to not have to roll out Gardner Minshew, or Aiden O'Connell is on that list. I'm not heading that direction. It would be Minshew. I would love to start Kyler Murray, but I just don't think it's going to happen, unfortunately. I think we're getting Clayton Tune this week, and then next week we can get ourselves a little Kyler Murray.
Well, the reason I mentioned that is because we talked about Will Levis. He's taking over this week. Ryan Tannehill's got that ankle injury. Kenny Pickett looks like he's going to play Thursday Night Football. He's dealing with a rib injury. Or else we'd be talking about Mitch Trubisky in this whole conversation as well. Matthew Stafford's injured. I mean, there's injuries all over. It's not just limited to the wide receiver or to the quarterback position. We're talking wide receivers, pass catchers here. Puka Nacua, he had some swelling of the knee. DeAndre Hopkins had 3 touchdowns and a swollen ankle. Drake London is definitely an injury we have to be watching here throughout the week. He had that groin strain, and man, a lot of people got excited when Desmond Ridder stepped aside and Taylor Heineke took over here at quarterback. We were thinking that was going to be good for Kyle Pitts and Drake London, but we might not even be able to see Drake London this week. Darren Waller, so water is wet. Darren Waller is dealing with a soft tissue hamstring injury. Kendrick Bourne, one of our favorites on the show, ACL loss for the season. Curtis Samuel, he's dealing with something. Josh Palmer's got that knee injury. And then a running back, Travis Etienne, it looked like he kind of tweaked that ankle a little bit, but he came back, obviously, and finished off last week's game. So those are some of the injuries from last week. We talked about the buys, but when we look back at last week, Tara, what was something that got you excited or maybe disappointed you in week 8's performances?
Something that got me excited, I guess we can say that, I was very sad about Kendrick Bourne. But Demario Douglas being the target leader, that did get me excited because we're looking at that thinking about the matchup there, looking at that New England Patriots offense and the fact that they're finally not forcing Juju Smith-Schuster and Devontae Parker to be the leaders within that offense, and they're acknowledging that they need to move on to letting the more explosive wide receivers take over. And Demario Douglas is the guy that profiles to being able to step into the wide receiver one of that offense. And sometimes we, look at Mac Jones as a wild disappointment, and I agree with that clearly. And the Patriots offense is being underwhelming. But the wide receiver one does have value in it. Kendrick Bourne was a very streamable, nice flex option there, and Demario Douglas can be that as well. So I anticipate him stepping in to this role very well. And that got me excited.
Well, speaking of getting excited, Tara, are you one of those people that as soon as Halloween ends, you start bringing out the Christmas decorations, or do you kind of typically wait till after Thanksgiving? Which way do you kind of go with that?
I'm lucky if I can get a tree up within, at the beginning of December. We're on the struggle bus here in terms of getting everything up. I was better last year, but yeah, no, I don't have any decorations up yet. It ain't happening for another month.
Well, my wife, it's like as soon as Halloween ends, it is Christmas time. And you know what? As a Raiders fan, Christmas came early for us as they cleaned house. I mean, we're talking general manager, we're talking head coach, we're talking offensive coordinator. And obviously, this goes deeper. I mean, Josh McDaniels, he only made it pretty much this length. Didn't even make it through 2 years there with the Denver Broncos. Didn't even make it that long here with the Las Vegas Raiders. I think that's the end of the road for Josh McDaniels, but there seemed to be so much friction there. And I think this is a good thing for the Raiders for fantasy, because I think whatever was kind of in that locker room, I think the errands of grievances is now out of there. They don't have the coach to blame. Now maybe they go back to that Rick Bisaccia there type of situation there where they start playing for one another. And maybe Devontae Adams can get going finally this season, because he has not been going at all. And probably one of the reasons was Jimmy Garoppolo. And part of these players' meetings with Mark Davis may have been, hey, put Aiden O'Connell in there because Jimmy Garoppolo can't throw the ball worth a lick. So I think we're going to see some good things coming from Las Vegas here moving forward. But the thing that that was the thing I was excited about. The thing I'm more disappointed in was Jonathan Taylor's usage, which was really a mystery to me, because he came out in that first half. I think he had like 11 carries, 94 yards. You're like, all right, Jonathan Taylor's back, people. Let's go. Second half, he had 1 carry. What do we do with that, Tara? What do we do with Jonathan Taylor getting 1 carry in the second half? We just were seeing Jonathan Taylor catch up to Zach Moss when it came to opportunity share. And then we saw him take that opportunity in the first half. And then the Colts pulled the reins back on him, and they gave it to Zach Moss in the second half. What do we do with this Colts backfield?
We start them both. I don't think it's a panic situation. Jonathan Taylor is a trade candidate for me, trade for candidate. And when you're looking at the production that Jonathan Taylor has had, even last week, I know, the usage split was kind of odd, but it still ended up being a 50-50. And that has been consistent. So maybe they kind of looked at it and said, okay, we got to pull back on Jonathan Taylor a little bit because we overshot his usage in the first half. And we need to pull the reins and kind of, adjust there and kind of even out the usage. And I think that's what's happening there. And Zach Moss is still going to have involvement throughout the remainder of the season. But the thing is that they're not pushing high pass volume in Indianapolis. Gardner Minshew has done well, but in ways that he's done well, it's because he's been efficient, not because he's throwing a Sam Howell level of production. That's not happening over there. They're a run-heavy team. They're going to continue to be run-heavy. And I'm okay if we continue to see split carries, because since Jonathan Taylor has been back, excluding that first game, because we know that was a known limitation of very small workload. But over the past 3 games, he's averaged a high-end RB2. And I know that's not ideal, but we're talking about a split backfield where they're easing him back in, limiting the usage, and he's still averaging out to a high-end RB2, averaging like 14 fantasy points per game in PPR. Receptions are kind of happening there as well. I'm not panicked over it. I'm encouraged by what I'm seeing.
I love how you mentioned Minshew and Howell in the same sentence there. How they get it done very differently, because Minshew's basically got that YOLO ball going. I think Downs had 5 catches for 125 yards, which worked out about 25 yards per reception. Michael Pittman had 2 catches for like 80 yards, which was like 41 yards per reception. So They are doing it in chunk plays in the passing game there in Indianapolis and letting the run game do its thing. Now, when we want to do our thing in Dynasty football, we're always looking for the trade that puts us over the top. But we don't want to just make a trade that helps us win now. We want to make a trade that's going to help us win now and still put us in contention for years to come. So when you look in your crystal ball here, Tara, for the rest of the season, who is a player right now this week here entering week number 9 that you're willing to trade for, not only in redraft, but for Dynasty as well?
Go out and get Kenneth Walker as people take this last game and start to panic and think that this is it. This is the switch over to Zach Charbonnet, because I don't think that's what really happened last week. We got to remember that Kenneth Walker was dealing with a calf injury all week. And although he was cleared to play on Friday off of the practice report, it's very possible that Seattle just kind of looked at this and said, we got to pull back and limit him a little bit because we don't want to aggravate something and prolong this, because we have a real shot here for relevancy throughout the remainder of the season, and we want Kenneth Walker there. So Kenneth Walker is still the RB1 in that offense. You can kind of tell by the fact that he was outsnapped by Zach Charbonnet, but Kenneth Walker still had the most carries. So what does that indicate to you? They were taking him off the field when it wasn't necessary for him to run the ball. So again, don't panic over this, but if other people are panicking, buy that dip on Kenneth Walker, because the talent is very clear. He fits the offense well. He's been performing at a high level. The production has been there. So don't panic over here. He's been strong. There is no glaring issue. There was just an injury.
One of my favorite questions I get on all the Discord channels I'm in is, Zach Charbonnet, do I drop him for Tajay Spears? Do I drop Tajay Spears for Zach Charbonnet? Listen, it's a lateral move. Both these running backs, they need someone to get hurt in front of them to be effective. If something were to happen to either Kenneth Walker and or Derrick Henry, these two running backs are going to take off. But until something happens, we're not going to see those touches necessary. The snaps might be there, but the touches not so much. But one guy that I'm excited about getting touches here moving forward is Marquise Hollywood Brown. And he's 26, so he's definitely a guy that you could target for your Dynasty rosters as well. 26-year-old receiver. He's still got 3 seasons left in him before he hits that age 29, age 30 kind of cliff that wide receivers tend to tail off a little bit. Now, he's been going relatively unnoticed this season, and still he's somewhere in that 21 to 25 range. And that's with working with Joshua Dobbs, which is one of those things that's like, you know what? That's probably not going to work for me. But right now is the time to strike before Kyler Murray returns, because he's had some bad weeks leading up to this. But when Kyler Murray's back, you are getting yourself one of the top wide receivers in the National Football League. If you look back to last season's numbers, I mean, we're watching, I think it was before the injury sidetracked his 2022 campaign, he was a wide receiver 6 with Kyler Murray, under center there, weeks 1 through 6, averaging 18.3 fantasy points per game. If you can get a wide receiver right now that averages 18 fantasy points per game, he's going to be your wide receiver 1, and you're going to be able to plug him in as your wide receiver 3. And I don't think the cost right now is going to cost you a whole heck of a lot to add him to your rosters, because I don't think a lot of people value him where he should be valued. So for me, he's a guy that I like not only for the rest of this season, but considering his age, he's a guy I want to get out there and feel good about on my other rosters as well. Now, Tara, when we go into week number 9, let's talk about those quarterbacks now that we are starting and sitting. Who's a must start and a must sit quarterback for you heading into this week?
Before I do my must start quarterback here, just anybody that's watching on the YouTube version is like, why is Tara oddly like leaning back and looking like I swear I'm not disinterested. I have a back injury and I'm just kind of like moving around a lot and trying to adjust and get comfortable. And it's just not happening. It just hurts. My back is akin to Matt's hips. We're like old and hobbled. Maybe I'll get mine fixed, Matt, and line up some kind of surgery. But yeah, so if it looks like I'm like weirdly positioned, that is why. But my start of the week, I hate to continue to discuss said quarterback that I've discussed a little bit, but Sam Howell, if you gotta dip into the streaming pull right here, Sam Howell is the guy to do it with. I know people get scared with the level of volume disappearing for him, because he does kind of fool you sometimes, unfortunately. although it's a little bit easier to predict. But it's not a kind of big game, little game, big game, little game. He can have back-to-back strong games, and I like him to have a strong game maybe more often moving forward. When you look at those trades that happened at the trade deadline, Washington said YOLO and dumped their defensive like superstars, Chase Young, Montez Sweat, shipped them off. And now we're looking at a Washington defense that was already hobbled enough as it was in terms of just, something that we were viewing as a defense that you have to attack, that you want to attack. But on top of that, now you've got a questionable pass rush. The teams could just continue to light up this Washington defense at a rapid rate, and if they do that, unfortunately, they're going to have to abandon the run, and Sam Howell is going to have to continue to chuck it at a rapid rate. We saw over 50 target attempts for him last week. We can easily see that again. So I like Sam Howell rolling him out if you need a streaming option and a high upside streaming option. In terms of a sit this week, it's kind of difficult to even pinpoint a sit, unfortunately, just because, again, you're looking at these quarterbacks and you're feeling like there's just no options really for you to be able to turn to because unfortunately, we've got this weird situation where we barely have any quarterbacks. We've got quarterbacks that are injured. We've got quarterbacks on a bye week, as Matt discussed. So, unfortunately, here, one of the quarterbacks, and I'm going to have to defer to you because I don't want to steal your thunder here. And I might have been stalling a little bit to make sure I wasn't double dipping here, but it is Geno Smith here that I agree with. Is if you have to kind of look at somebody as a must sit quarterback, and I don't feel like many of them are must sits. I do think it's Geno Smith, but I'll let you talk in depth about that one, Matt.
Well, yeah, I'll talk about Geno Smith here because he was everyone's darling last season, right? I mean, we were all talking about Geno Smith this, Geno Smith that. He was kind of that quarterback that we're like, hey, you know what? He's going to be the guy to get us to the promised land, and we don't have to pay up to get him. Well, guess what? Even though he had a solid outing against the Browns last week, against a very tough defense, he threw a pair of touchdowns, 250 yards, but he also threw a couple picks. This week, he gets another difficult matchup against Baltimore, I believe, there, and it's not a good matchup for him there. I mean, he's got, I think the Ravens have like 5 interceptions and given up just 1 touchdown over the last 4 weeks. They're allowing just 7.17 fantasy points per game. Even on the season, Baltimore has allowed just 6 passing touchdowns. 5 interceptions and 1 touchdown over the last 4 weeks, like I said. But this season, they've been tough. They're averaging just, I think, 176.6 yards per game. Fantasy quarterbacks are averaging 11.34, which is a low. And ever since Dave Canales there left Seattle for Tampa Bay, you simply can't trust Geno Smith. He, for Halloween purposes, he's like having a candy apple without the candy part of the apple. It's just a nasty ass apple is all it is. That's what Geno Smith is right now. As far as my start this week, it's Derek Carr versus Chicago. You either love him or you hate him. He's like candy corn. I mean, it's that simple. Last week against Indianapolis, he threw for 310 yards. And this week, he faces a Bears team that is allowing the 3rd most fantasy points, 18.85 per game to quarterbacks this season. We saw Justin Herbert make short work of the Bears last week, 298 passing yards, 3 touchdowns. So you can expect the floor for Derek Carr to be 300 yards this week. The Bears have allowed the 2nd most passing touchdowns, 17, and over 2,100 yards passing this season. And like you said, we are without Goff, Wilson, Trevor Lawrence, Brock Purdy, and a bunch of other quarterbacks due to injury. Derek Carr is a top 12 quarterback this week, I think pretty easily. I don't think there's a lot of people that are going to be questioning that. Some other interesting starts this week. Dak Prescott, you mentioned Sam Howell, Gardner Minshew. These are guys that get you out. CJ Stroud, I think, is a guy that can get your job done. For me, I have an interesting dilemma because I have to decide between Jordan Love, Tyler Heineke, and good Lord, who do I have? Mac Jones. And I don't know which way I'm going to go yet for one of my teams right now because I've been hit. My quarterbacks are Brock Purdy. I had Kirk Cousins and Kyler Murray. So it's going to be interesting. Some quarterbacks that I'm definitely avoiding outside of Geno Smith. Jordan Love is one of those guys. I don't like the matchup. I don't like what he's been able to do recently. Daniel Jones is coming back this week from injury, so it'll be good to see him out there. But I don't feel Daniel Jones. I didn't feel him before his injury. I certainly don't feel him coming back from his injury. Now, when we turn our attention to the let's stick here. Just on the quarterbacks here in my rankings here. Mahomes, Allen, Hurts, Jackson, Burrow, Tagovailoa, Prescott, Herbert. No real surprises in my top 8, I don't think. And then it kind of gets weird because there's a whole area here in rankings that I don't know where to go with it or what to do with it. So I got Derek Carr at 9, Stroud at 10, Sam Howell at 11, Gardner Minshew at 12. Jordan Love, I think, comes in there at 13. I don't have Geno Smith there until 17. I don't. It's a very interesting situation with the quarterback position because it's all over. Once you get past those top 8 options, it's really anyone's game. Tara, when you take a look at the running back position, who are your must-start and must-sit running backs for week number 9?
My must-start running back is going to be Chuba Hubbard, RB1 for the Carolina Panthers. What a dramatic turnaround. And he's a must start for me because I feel like some people will be scared to start him and feel uncomfortable with it. By no means am I saying that he's going to be a top 12 back in this week, but it is a good matchup here for him. And I do think that he has legitimately taken over this backfield. When we look at his production from last week, we're talking about 15 rush attempts compared to Miles Sanders' 2. The yards per carry were not ideal, but you got to kind of put that to the side and understand that the yards per carry for any running back, although, there weren't many carries to be had for any other running back, were not ideal as a whole. It was a bad defensive matchup. They weren't able to find any room, really. But he dominated, absolutely dominated. And Frank Reich came out and kind of tried to speak on the situation. And the quote, if you go and read the quote, I don't understand how you could listen or read what Frank Reich said and have any confidence in Miles Sanders. At the very least, it can't go back further than a committee. They're not swapping back, in my opinion. So Chuba Hubbard is leading this backfield the rest of the way. And I do feel like this is a good matchup, so feel comfortable with rolling him out here, even if it feels a little weird. My sit of the week, unfortunately, is going to be a little bit dramatic here, and it's going to be Tony Pollard. It is purely matchup based, but I say purely matchup based, but there's also the problem that he just hasn't produced in a long time. This offense is just not really doing well from a standpoint of the run game. And the carries aren't really there from him at a high level. It's not a ton of consistency in terms of targets. Last week, he only saw 1 target. So unfortunately here, I just don't see where you can really trust him to really be a high upside option, especially given the matchup. I think this is going to be an aggressive Dak Prescott game, and we're going to see continued volume out of him, hyper focus on CeeDee Lamb, and Tony Pollard is unfortunately going to fall to the wayside. And the only way he's really going to have production is if he somehow managed to get a touchdown, which has been difficult to come by this year for him, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, Tony Pollard, I got him as my RB14. I feel I'm a little too high on him this week in my rankings. The problem with Tony Pollard is Dallas Cowboy, the game script. They cannot find themselves a close game at all this season. I think 1 of their 7 games have been decided by 12 or less points. I think 2 of their games have been decided by less than 20. So they're either getting blown out or they're blowing out the competition, which means Tony Pollard's not even needed. So we're seeing those touches for him. Now, I love the Chuba Hubbard there as not only a Canadian here, but a guy who believes in Hubbard and the talent. If I look at my rankings, and he's kind of in that cluster right now, I got him at RB19 this week, so a very solid RB2. But if you look at the names around him, Jerome Ford, James Cook, Gus Edwards, Kareem Hunt, Ramondre Stevenson, Zach Moss, Darrell Henderson, would you put him ahead of probably all those guys there?
Everybody but Gus, really. And Gus has a terrible matchup. So, yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a, shaky situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why we love Hubbard. It's if you look at his ability to make plays happen, his forced missed tackle rate, those are the things that are very important for the Carolina Panthers and for Frank Reich. He's definitely been the more explosive of the 2 backs. Now, for me, when I look at my must-start guys this week, I'm going to go with a good old reliable guy here in Joe Mixon versus the Buffalo Bills. Look, he's definitely more than just he's like a bag of potato chips and a lot more this week. I mean, after 110 yards and a touchdown against the 49ers team that was considered one of the top defensive units in the NFL, many have pointed out that Mixon had those early season struggles. I think a lot of those struggles coincided with Joe Burrow and the injury, right? We can agree that when Joe Burrow wasn't quite right, Joe Mixon isn't going to be quite right because of everything that kind of plays off of one another. Well, guess what? Joe Burrow is healthy. That means you can fire up Joe Mixon Sunday Night Football versus the Buffalo Bills. Mostly because without Matt Milano, Buffalo has nobody who can defend Joe Mixon. Not in the run game, not in the passing game. You look back to last week there on Thursday Night Football, Rachaad White had 109 total yards on 16 touches. 70 of those yards came on 7 receptions. So I'm expecting Joe Mixon to be heavily involved in the passing game for the Bengals here. Now, my sit, and Tara, this one hurts because you know me. I love Aaron Jones, probably more than most people right now. And I have to say, you know what? I'm close to starting Chuba Hubbard over Aaron Jones. I don't know if I got the set on me to do that because, I mean, it's Aaron Jones we're still talking about, but he hasn't looked right. Maybe it's Matt LaFleur, but how do you only give Aaron Jones 11 touches? 11 touches. There's a reason why Aaron Rodgers decided, you know what, screw this. I'm not listening to Matt LaFleur call offense anymore. I'm going to call my own plays. I can see why now. We were all excited about Matt LaFleur's offense taking place. Well, if his offense includes Aaron Jones getting 11 touches and whatever we're seeing out there in Green Bay, and Tara, as a Packers fan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. It's not her back that's bugging her anymore. It's her Green Bay pride, what I'm talking right now. That's why you're seeing her starting to slouch even more. But I can't get behind Aaron Jones. I can't right now. And it pains me because Aaron Jones is literally one of my favorite players out there. And I know we're missing players like Christian McCaffrey, Javonte Williams, Travis Etienne, Jahmyr Gibbs because of bye. And you're probably going to have to start starting players that you don't want to start. It's like accepting those nasty candy rockets. You don't want to accept them, but you're out there trick-or-treating anyway. Well, this is fantasy, so we're probably going to have to accept that Aaron Jones is going to be in our lineups. We don't have to like it, but it's probably what's going to happen. Some other starts and sits there at the running back position. I mean, this is just – I just look around. I just wonder what we can do about this because – like it's not as bad as the quarterback position per se because we have a few more options available to us. But you look around and you're like, oh man, Tara, what can we do? Who's those running backs that we can start? Who can we trust this week? Well, I mean, Rachaad White's a guy I'm willing to trust again. You mentioned Zach Moss at the top of the show. Ramondre Stevenson has an interesting matchup versus Washington. Jerome Ford, great matchup. I think I caught you talking about starting both Kareem Hunt and Jerome Ford on another show or another video there on TikTok. Or on Twitter or wherever it was, but you talked about Jerome Ford and Kareem Hunt as both potential starts because Arizona cannot stop the run. Do you want to talk about these two real quick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the thing is that we have to understand is that the position that Cleveland is in right now, and I know we don't 100% know what the quarterback situation is going to be this week, but I don't think it particularly matters. They're leaning aggressively on the run. And the volume, when you're seeing these teams that are leading aggressively on the run, I talked about it with Indianapolis, you get multiple viable options, even though they're in a committee, because it's a successful committee. It's different than an Alexander Madison Cam Akers situation, because they can also both have upside there. And I think Cleveland really has that. We saw last week, even Pierre Strong got in there and had production. So if they're in a good situation, their line has been fine. This matchup is excellent. I would expect, as long as, Jerome Ford is healthy and there's no, continuing issues with that knee kind of limiting him, they're both very startable options this week.
Yeah, and you mentioned another sit there is Alexander Madison. Do not start Alexander Madison. Do not start Dameon Pierce. Because right now, Devin Singletary is going to take over that backfield. I promise you that much. And Cam Akers, it wouldn't surprise me if he took over the Vikings backfield. Now, Tara, turning our attention to the pass catchers. Let's talk wide receiver starts and sits. Who do you got?
For my start, I'm going with Nico Collins. He's been disappointing recently. I get that. And for multiple games, this is a significant slump that he has gone through, but it is coinciding with CJ Stroud. It's not like CJ Stroud has fallen in love with another wide receiver. It's just been going through some difficult times here. And that's to be expected because, CJ Stroud got off to a fantastic start, but he did get off to a fantastic start with good matchups. So, we got to, take some of those rookie growing pains and deal with it. But I like this matchup for them against the Tampa Bay defense. They've been tougher against the run. You talked about that backfield of Dameon Pierce and Devin Singletary. I don't see Devin Singletary taking over, but quite frankly, neither one of them have been highly productive. So this is not a situation where I think that Houston is going to say, man, we got to lean on Devin Singletary and Dameon Pierce. I think they're going to let CJ Stroud cook on this one and really attack this Tampa Bay secondary that's been very vulnerable against the pass. So I like Nico Collins and CJ Stroud for a nice little bounce back here week. And for my sit, I hate this, but I think you got to sit Marquise Brown, unfortunately, this week. More than likely, we're getting Clayton to if you have the luxury of doing that. I've got a Dynasty League where I don't have the luxury of doing that. So Marquise is getting rolled out regardless. But if you got the luxury of doing it, avoid Marquise Brown this week in the experimentation week, likely of Clayton Tune. It's just not the ideal situation. It's not the ideal matchup with Cleveland. So just nip it in the bud and save yourself the trouble if you can.
I'll put it this way. I'm higher than most on Marquise Brown this week. I got him at wide receiver 28. That's about 9 spots higher than the consensus when it comes to Hollywood Brown. And that is that Tooney factor there when we talk about who the quarterback is for the Cardinals. Now, saying that, I look around at some of these other position players there. I love Nico Collins. I got him as a wide receiver 11 this week. So I really feel everything about Collins. I love what he's been doing. I love what CJ Stroud. I love what the Texans are doing in general in their offense, outside of being able to not run the ball. But when I look at guys I'm starting and sitting this week, I got to start with Garrett Wilson of the New York Jets versus the Los Angeles Chargers. The Chargers, they're horrible, right? They're one of the worst teams in the league when it comes to passing yards allowed, 260 per game. That's the 5th most. 40.9 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers. That's the 3rd most. The thing is, for the Jets, they're going to have to find a way to keep Zach Wilson clean in that pocket. If they do that, he's going to have himself a field day. And the best way to do that is to soften up the coverage by getting our guy Bryce Young involved. You get Bryce Young involved, teams are going to start to focus on him. That's going to open up things for Garrett Wilson. The thing is, Garrett Wilson, he's getting a 38% target share going back to last week. If you're going to get a 38% target share in fantasy, heck, if you're going to get a 38% target share against the Los Angeles Chargers, that is going to end up being a top 12 fantasy week because the Chargers cannot stop anybody in the pass game. So for me, if we're seeing a 38%, anything over 30% for Garrett Wilson as far as targets are concerned is going to translate very nicely for Garrett Wilson. Now, staying in this game, the matchup I don't like, it's Keenan Allen. Tara, this one hurts too because we both love Keenan Allen, but you got to follow the numbers here. So I'm not going to tell you not to start Keenan Allen, but I'm going to tell you got to temper those expectations here because this Jets team is allowing just 164.3 passing yards per game. And I just have a feeling when you're dealing with the injuries that the Chargers are, Mike Williams out for the season, Josh Palmer with a knee, Quentin Johnson coming into play, expect a lot of Austin Eckler underneath. We saw how this translates when it becomes a 2-horse race there in Los Angeles between Allen and Eckler. It's always Eckler who benefits with those short passes underneath. We saw this last season, and we're going to see it again. And it's not just that. Where do you put Keenan Allen this week? Where do you hide him? How do you get him away from coverage? You put him on one boundary, he's got Sauce Gardner. You put him on the other, it's DJ Reed. You put him in the slot, it's Michael Carter. These are all tough matchups. So, and we know with nobody else involved, the Jets secondary is going to be, the focal point is going to be stopping Keenan Allen, right? That's what the secondary is going to be doing. It's going to be Quincy Williams and everyone else taking care of Austin Eckler. So I do not like Keenan Allen at all this week. That's why he's a little bit down on my rankings. But I mean, what can we say when we look at the rankings? I got Tyreek Hill, Jamar Chase, A.J. Brown, CeeDee Lamb, Stephon Diggs, and there's Adam Thielen coming in at wide receiver 6 this week for me. What can we say about Adam Thielen moving forward? Because I don't think he's going to show any signs of slowing down. I think Adam Thielen is a must start each and every week based on volume. Thoughts, Tara?
I agree. I mean, we saw a little dip here. We were concerned about the switch in play calling, maybe adjusting how they were going to utilize wide receivers in that offense. But, Thielen was still the clear wide receiver 1. Volume was a little down. It was kind of a weird game there where absolutely no one was producing through the air. So yeah, I think we still continue to feel comfortable with Adam Thielen moving forward.
All right, some other wide receivers we can feel comfortable with. Deontay Johnson, PPR especially. Zay Flowers, I like him. Josh Downs, we talked about Gardner Minshew chucking it up there. I feel good about him. T. Higgins, I don't hate. Demario Douglas, one of our favorite sleepers this week. I think you could plug him and play him this week and have a good week. Raheed Shaheed, again, and Rashid Rice are always going to be on my sleeper list. Now sitting, Drake London, that groin injury, it worries me. I don't think he's going to be there. Christian Watson, I simply do not trust his ability right now. And again, Jordan Addison, I don't know if you can sit him, but KJ Osborne, I certainly can sit. So he's another wide receiver that I'm sitting and avoiding this week. Now, finally, let's talk tight ends, Tara. Who are you starting? Who are you sitting at the tight end position?
I am starting Jake Ferguson. We are starting Jake Ferguson. At some point, people, you just got to buy into it and accept it that, he is a startable option. There have been some down weeks, but I feel like you can trust it with the volume that we're now seeing this Dallas Cowboys offense push, and it's benefiting Jake Ferguson as well. And we've also seen, an uptick in touchdowns for him. So I lean towards Jake Ferguson as being someone that you could trust, especially in this matchup with Philadelphia, who I, mentioned earlier that when we talked about Tony Pollard, you don't want to put a lot of faith in the run game against the Philadelphia defense. You want to exploit them through the air, and Jake Ferguson can be a big beneficiary there, kind of off of the strong week that he had last week. My sit of the week, I'm not going to lie, it was kind of difficult to find a sit there. It's always difficult to find sits at tight end. I probably lean towards your sit, Matt, but if you have to, Cole Kmet could be a sit of the week just purely based off the matchup potentially being an issue here for him. That is it. That's the only reason. We finally at least did see him have a strong game last week, but again, it was against the LA Chargers, who just tend to be a strong matchup in general. So this might be a situation where Cole Kmet is kind of matchup based with Justin Fields out, unfortunately, and I just don't like this matchup.
Yeah, and for me, my start is going to be Dalton Kincaid. I got him at tight end 3 this week. I love what he's been doing as of late. You look at Thursday Night Football there, 5 catches on 7 targets, 65 yards, finishes a top 5 in week number 8 there. And we saw the week before that, it was, I think he had another big week there as well. So he said he's coming off of back-to-back good performances there for the Bills team. And he's facing a Cincinnati Bengals team that's allowing 15.3 fantasy or 15.11 fantasy points per game. And no team outside of the New York Jets has allowed more passing touchdowns than the Bengals have. So for me, that's definitely a start in Dalton Kincaid, who really is playing. It makes things interesting because he did play more of a tight end role than what I anticipated him. I thought he was going to be more of a slot type wide receiver, but Shakir kind of took that slot role for Buffalo. They had Kincaid filling in more of a tight end there with Dawson Knox not being available. Now, you kind of alluded to my sit being David Njoku there against Arizona. I'm telling you, Njoku is a fantasy trick. I mean, luckily for fantasy managers last week, Mark Andrews found his way into the end zone after a 4-catch, 40-yard performance. I had Mark Andrews on my sit list, and I took a lot of heat for it. Why did I have Mark Andrews on my sit list? Because Arizona is really good at defending tight ends. They're one of the top teams this season when it comes to limiting tight ends for fantasy. Yes, that Cardinals, one of the stingiest teams. So keep that in mind moving forward when you're looking at starts and sits at the tight end position. You mentioned some of these other tight ends that we could talk about all day. Taysom Hill, I think, is a sneaky start when you're looking at guys that you stick in there. If you want a sleeper at the tight end position, I think Donald Parham's that guy because we talked about Gerald Everett not being the answer. Well, the Jets have given up, I think, 5 touchdown passes to tight ends this season. Well, Donald Parham has 4 touchdown passes himself. And I'm not very smart at math, but if I got a tight end who's got 4 touchdown passes going against a team that gives up the most touchdown passes, I think there's a pretty good chance that Parham is going to have a touchdown reception in this contest. You mentioned Cole Kmet as a sit. David Njoku is a sit for me. These are guys. Tyler Higbee's another guy I simply don't trust. So if you're looking for starts and sits, that kind of covers it from there. Tara, let everyone know where they can find all your work heading into the rest of this week, heading into the weekend, where to find you. I know you're always doing stuff there with Roto World there, Miss Fantasy. You're always looking for stuff for your mailbag.
I am. Yeah. Drop your questions always on my Twitter for me to include in my podcast mailbag show for player profiler, Dear Miss Fantasy. You can find me Fantasy Pros, all that good stuff, 444. Twitter is the best place to go to. It's Terror Time is where you can find me.
And let's not forget about CBS there doing those injury roundups each and every week too. So, hey, if you want injury, if you want fantasy news, Tara's got you covered for all your fantasy football information. And if you want more information, head to Fantasy Points, the Discord channel. I'm there answering questions 24/7. Same with over at Roto Baller. And of course, right here on the Vipers Network. And we will see you next week. Take care.